Now, this kind of logically leads to the question of why does an adolescent choose a partner, whether that's for dating, friendship that has led to something more, for a sexual encounter, or anything else? How does an adolescent determine who they're interested in? Well, in the last chapter, we talked about how we choose friends, that we want to be friends with people who are similar to us. And the same applies to people we want to have a romantic relationship with. We like similarity. I know this doesn't sound very exciting, and this usually isn't the basis for exciting TV shows and movies, but it's true. Opposites may attract for a short while, but they don't usually attract, and if they do, it doesn't usually result in a relationship. Instead, we tend to be attracted to people who are similar to us in terms of ethnicity, social class, their personality, their beliefs, even similar to us in terms of intelligence. The academic term for this is consensual validation, meaning that with a romantic partner, people like to find an agreement or consensus with their own characteristics. And when you find somebody who's similar to you, what this does is it kind of validates your own way of looking at the world. So, consensual validation. So, in a lot of ways, this is similar to the principle of selective association regarding choosing who your friends are, but it kind of takes it to the next level. So, consensual validation is really significant for an adolescent in choosing who they want to be a romantic partner, at least in the beginning. Consensual validation will affect who you are attracted to. Somebody you're not going to have regular disagreements about based on pretty simple things like what you both like to do, or big differences in your personality, or even big differences in your socioeconomic status. But after all that, after you narrow down kind of the choices of people with whom you have consensual validation, what is it that leads to love? Well, I spoke about Robert Sternberg's triangular theory of love. Bradford Brown, who teaches at the University of Wisconsin, created a theory of love specifically for adolescents, a developmental model of adolescent love that involves 4 stages: initiation, status, affection, and bonding. Each of these stages follow the development of adolescence itself, meaning as the person grows and develops, their romantic relationships, if they have any, will also grow and develop through these stages. So, clearly, the first stage is going to be initiation. If a person has a romantic relationship or an interest in one, they will be in the initiation stage. This is like an introductory stage when you're just beginning to explore romance. And because it's the beginning, for people, their early attempts at being romantic will be pretty brief, pretty shallow, and typically involve a lot of anxiety and fear. So they're excited and they want to start having these relationships, but it's still nerve-wracking because it's new. So you have anxiety. So this is me on my first date being excited about it, but also so nervous I was shaking uncontrollably. Now, yes, part of the anxiety of and nervousness that occurs during this stage is because, like I said, the whole thing's completely new and you have no experience at all. But part of the anxiety and nervousness is also because you're very aware of your friends and peers and what they're going to think about it. So, something really important about Brown's model of adolescent love is something he does is that he specifically recognizes that friends and peers can have a significant effect on adolescent love. A relationship in this initiation phase lasts a few days or a few weeks, but that's about it. So at the beginning, you're very aware of your friends' opinions. And again, if you think of grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, that was a big thing. What do you think of him? Or what do you think of her? For Brown, his next stage is the status phase. So you've had your first initial experiences in the world of romance. So romantic relations are no longer completely new. You've got a little bit more comfort with them. You've got a little bit of practice, but you are nowhere being completely confident. You're not a newbie, as my son likes to say, but you're not completely confident either. And because of this, a person in the status phase begins to establish their first real romantic relationships. Keeping in mind, these are early relationships. The person's still going to be very aware of what their friends think, maybe excruciatingly aware, painfully aware of what their friends think. What do their friends think of the person? Do they think the person is attractive? Do they think the person would fit in with them? Will their friends make fun of them for liking somebody considered of a lower social status than them? So remember in the last chapter about peers and friends, we discussed crowds and cliques and that social hierarchy that commonly occurs during adolescence, in middle school and high school. During that time of your life, it's a pretty big thing to want to be with somebody who's not part of your own clique, and maybe one not part of even your crowd, or part of a crowd with less social status. So a relationship in the status phase might last a few days or a few weeks, and then we keep going. In the affection phase of the developmental model of adolescent love, this builds on the last two phases. And remember, more time has progressed and you've had more experience. So two young people really start to get to know each other here. And as a result, in the affection phase, you develop a more emotional connection. And this is also the phase, sorry parents, when adolescents are likely to participate in sexual activity for the first time. Maybe because they have more of an emotional connection with each other. So they're more truly emotionally attached to each other. That's going to increase the likelihood of sexual activity. But once sexual activity is added in, it also means you kind of have a lot more to manage in the relationship because you're managing emotional issues and possibly sexual issues. Now, in the affection phase, friends and peers are still important. They're still somewhat important in terms of their perception of the relationship, but also your perception of your friends' perceptions becomes more complicated. In a way, they almost become a part of the whole relationship process because at this point you have more of an emotional connection with your partner. So your friends are going to be providing support when things run smoothly. They're going to help keep an eye on your romantic partner. But maybe you experienced this yourself or know others who did. Sometimes the romantic relationship seems to overtake friendships, which can also cause issues in the friendship. So once you've been with somebody for several months during this stage of adolescent love, you might be accused of spending too much time with your partner and ditching your friends, which is going to cause problems in the friendships. So relationships in this phase can last several months, not just a couple days, not just a couple weeks. And the last phase in Dr. Brown's model of adolescent love is the bonding phase. Oh, sorry, I have to go back. I went too far. Is the bonding phase. If you think about what bonding is, if something's bonded, it means it sticks to it, it attaches, it adheres. So when the bonding phase refers to a relationship, yes, even an adolescent relationship, it has become much more serious and stable and lasting, to the point that maybe even discussing future plans together. Now, yes, this is a phase of adolescent love. It usually emerges in emerging adulthood. This is not as much out of the ordinary for adolescents as you might think. How often do couples in their last year of high school talk about going to the same university or college at the same school, or at least in the same area? How often do couples at the end of high school plan to keep the relationship going long distance until they can physically be together again? Now, again, in both these situations, the relationship very rarely lasts. But the point is that they do try to figure out how to spend the rest of their life together. Now, if we're talking about what young people look for in a romantic partner, how their love develops and how their love proceeds, we also have to talk about what happens when that love ends. And you know what? I'm not going to make any jokes or wisecracks about how when we as adults look back at ourselves being desperately upset when a relationship ended as an adolescent and think it was silly. because it's not silly to you at the time. It was really emotional. You were hurt, you were disappointed, you were sad. Sometimes it includes a lot of anxiety or anger. The fact is, breaking up with somebody, no matter what your age, can be really, really hard. Whether that's for a short period of time or a long period of time, it hurts. And it's easy to take a purely academic perspective and talk about how most adolescent relationships are not real relationships. Think of all the people you had a crush on, and you're going to go through a lot of these. Remember that during adolescence, a person has this idea of an imaginary audience, thinking that other people are hyper-focused on them. And because everybody is hyper-focused on them, there must be something special and unique about them. So adolescents tend to be very egocentric, hyper-focused on themselves, and believing that others are hyper-focused on them because they're so unique, because they're so different from everybody else. Which is part of the reason why when an adolescent goes through a breakup, they can feel like the emotions they experience have never been experienced by anybody else, or at least not to the same extent. So when somebody dramatically yells, "Nobody understands what I'm going through," they may literally mean that. They may actually feel like no one else in the entire world understands how they feel. They may truly mean it when they say they feel like they will never experience happiness or love again. And also remember, these are a person's first experiences with heartbreak, which I think would probably continue in some way to making it feel so awful, or contribute to making it feel so awful, because it's a new feeling they're not used to, and they're not yet effective in dealing with it. Now, unfortunately, this is an area that has not been very well researched, the end of adolescent romantic relationships. The closest we can get is research based on relationships ending in emerging adulthood during college, as discussed in the text. Excuse me. So let's kind of take it a step further and start to really focus on actual sexuality and physical relationships for adolescents. When it comes to focusing specifically on physical relationships between adolescents, your textbook makes a distinction that I really, really like and really approve of, although that might be an odd thing to say. It says that when we look at sexual issues for adolescents, it's important to acknowledge not only sex, meaning intercourse, but sexuality overall. Because there's more to sex than just sex. There are cultural attitudes towards sexual issues which will absolutely directly affect adolescent sexuality, the social environment, the status of women, kind of more general sexual thoughts and beliefs. You have actual sexual behaviors, which encompasses a lot more than just intercourse. You've got practical issues like birth control and access to it, and then cultural and social attitudes towards birth control. So the list of issues affecting sexuality could go on for quite a bit. So I really like that the text makes a point of saying there is more to sex than just sex, even though the majority of research regarding adolescent sexuality focus on just actual intercourse, which is odd when you sit and think about the range of sexual behaviors and acts people can participate in instead of intercourse. For example, masturbation. Something for which there is still a pretty strong social stigma against discussing easily in public. It's considered inappropriate and embarrassing to discuss. And because of that, it's pretty difficult to get reliable estimates regarding how much occurs, either for adolescents or even adults. We like to think of ourselves as being so much more advanced and open and accepting as a society than in the past. But we still have this reluctance to speak openly about masturbation. In fact, we tend to speak more openly about intercourse. Now, we're not as restrained as we were in the past. We no longer believe that masturbating will cause insanity, or that it's possible to become addicted to it. We don't put chastity belts on girls and boys so that they can't touch themselves. But it's still something that is generally considered inappropriate to talk about or to admit to. Now, I'm going to talk about this openly because that's what we need to do. If we were in an actual classroom, I would do the same. In fact, I've taught a course in variations in human sexual behavior where we talk about a lot of stuff people don't talk about openly. It's just one more issue of humanity that can be discussed from a sociological perspective. Simple as that. That's the way I view it. The fact is, most adolescent boys have their first sexual experience by themselves by masturbating, usually around age 13 in North America and other parts of the world. And I'm not making a joke when I say that adolescent boys tend to masturbate frequently. That's what the research that does exist tells us. Yes, adolescent girls also masturbate, but their numbers are considerably lower in comparison. And just remember that, especially for adolescents, we simply don't have a lot of really reliable, complete research. As I said, even for adults, talking about masturbation is still viewed with a great deal of embarrassment. So for somebody in adolescence, getting them to participate in research, which would also require their parents' consent, and having all of that happen willingly is just very difficult. So for most young people, their first sexual experience, even though it's not with somebody else, is commonly masturbation. In terms of sexual experience with a partner, typically necking and petting are the beginning. Now, even if you never took this course or studied adolescent sexuality, I think most people would assume a person's first sexual experience with somebody is kissing. And kissing is, well, it's kissing. Again, without making a joke, there's all different kinds of kissing. It can be quick, it can be short, it can be basic, it can be more involved. But even the most awkward, cringe-worthy, quick peck of a kiss technically is sexual activity that does start as the beginning. Necking is a step further because it isn't just kissing. It is deep kissing that also includes mutual touching and stroking above the waist. Only above the waist. Yes, it can involve touching above the waist on top of clothes in addition to underneath clothes. So we know that for the majority of adolescents, at least white adolescents in North America, that are commonly the subjects of research, this is how it proceeds, from kissing to necking. But we also don't have a lot of research about this. Again, because conducting research regarding the sexuality of adolescents is difficult, and it requires the consent of parents. If you think about it, which adolescents would be most likely to participate in research and answer questions? They would be most likely to have parents with some sort of connection to the healthcare or research field. But regarding what research has been done, we know that in at least one study in North America, kissing is very common during adolescence. It's not unusual in any way. And necking is not rare either. In the same study, about 35% of girls said a boy had touched their breasts. Now, keep in mind, we don't know how extensive that contact is. Was it above the clothes or not? How long did it occur? But it does show us that young people at this age are interested in their sexuality, and they're starting to think about it more and explore it more as they proceed through adolescence. And we also know there's a very quick increase here in activity because by age 16, a majority of boys and girls report engaging in the breast touching aspect of necking. So we can infer then that because so many are doing it, it's considered for the most part socially acceptable. It's considered the kind of natural, normal progression of things. It's not considered unusual in any way. So adolescents usually start with kissing, which leads to necking, which leads to petting. Petting is necking kicked up a notch because it does refer to mutual touching and stroking, not just above the waist, but below the waist. And it doesn't specify above or below clothes. This is a significant step above necking. For white American adolescents, their sexual experience tends to follow this sequence. And we do tend to view this as kind of the natural progression of things, don't we? Now, unlike other issues of adolescent sexuality, we do have a good amount of research when it comes to the first time people are sexually active in terms of intercourse. The average age at first intercourse for both men and women has always been considered important for several areas of research, not just for studying the sexuality of young people. And when we look at this and how average age at first intercourse has or has not changed at different points in history, it follows kind of an interesting pattern. Because from 1925 to 1965, the proportion of high school students who reported having had intercourse at least once changed very, very little. I apologize for that noise there. My phone just rang. So, through all these decades, the percentage of males and females who had sex at some point in high school didn't change, which I found really odd. All of these things going on over the course of 40 years of history, very little changed. The Great Depression, World War II, the progression of sexual attitudes and fads and trends, shifts in culture, the average age at first intercourse for high school students in North America stayed the same, which I find kind of odd. Until the 1960s, which is widely regarded as a pivotal decade politically and socially. In the last half of the 60s, these numbers increased. More people were having sex at a younger age. In large part because for the first time, safe, reliable, easy to use, and affordable birth control became widely available. Think about it. How would the high school and post-secondary lives of the young people change without birth control? If there were no condoms, no diaphragms, no birth control pills, nothing. Now, in the 1950s, a woman could get a prescription for the pill from her doctor, but only for therapeutic reasons. So if she had menstrual irregularities of some kind, or trouble with her cycle, painful cramping, that sort of thing. So the birth control existed, and it was available, but not available for birth control purposes and very difficult to get. When birth control became widely available, it changed patterns of dating. It changed what it meant to be intimate. It meant that intimacy and sexual intercourse did not necessarily have to go together. It changed the social necessity of marriage to make intercourse a possibility, and all of this helped to make intercourse outside of marriage more acceptable. Not just birth control itself, but birth control that was widely available, that was effective, that was inexpensive and easy to administer. All of these characteristics needed to be present. If it was widely available but expensive, it wouldn't have had the same effect on society. If it was cheap and widely available but difficult to administer, so that taking it was somewhat of a complicated process, it wouldn't have had the same effect on society. But the birth control pill hit all of these goals, and this meant that for the first time in history, women could control their fertility. They could easily take control of their own reproductive capacities and decide when they wanted to have children. And I say when, not if, because at this point in time, it was still assumed that every woman wanted to have children at some point. Just the idea that some little pill, some medication, something so simple once a day could prevent pregnancy was huge. So I really can't overstate the significance of this. There's no way for me to adequately explain the effect this had on women of all ages, and for the purposes of this course, the experience of dating during adolescence, of what to expect. So you think of the effect on intimacy, on the decision to have any kind of sexual relationship with somebody, that would be based on the sex, not the intimacy. It really caused a shift in traditional sexual values and sexuality overall. By the 1990s, 54% of high school students reported being sexually active at least once. And in 2002, the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control in the United States, they published statistics stating that half of all high school students were sexually active at least once. And yes, The proportion of high school students who are sexually active is larger at the end of high school, so like in grade 12 than in grade 9. And it's the same in Europe. Generally, average age at first intercourse is 17. So let's kind of flip the coin here and take a look at something that is deserving as just as much attention, and that is adolescents who are not heterosexual.